Well, to everyone, welcome to History Matters. And so does, I didn't get coffee today. So does green juice. I'll be healthy. I know History Matters and so does green juice doesn't work. At any rate, but I'm going to be so healthy. But before we launch into today's episode, which is going to be about presidential children, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I am Annie Evans from New American History, and we are delighted to be with you today. We have a very interesting and timely discussion planned, and I will be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. That's where all of your wonderful questions need to go that are specific to this topic. Everything else you can save for the after party. So I will be back in about 30 minutes. Thanks, Joanne.
Excellent. And I will say two things. Be sure that if you're in chat and you want everyone to be able to see what it is you're saying, that you have the setting to whatever it is, everyone, all attendees. I don't know what the wording is. And also, if you are here for the first time, please tell folks in chat, because the wonderful History Matters community will offer you a robust welcome to History Matters on a Friday morning. So yes, timely, as Annie said, a timely topic about presidential children. And there are going to be things that I don't talk about. I suppose one could say contemporary presidential children are less what I'm interested in than looking back in time and thinking about this larger issue of presidential children being either, vulnerabilities or liabilities, or actually offering benefits of one kind or another. Obviously, what launched this topic is the fact that President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is now, I believe, has been indicted on gun-related charges that he lied about drug use when he purchased a gun in 2018. I will not comment on the irony of people looking to find him guilty of something and finding something related to gun purchasing. I'm just heading right past that simple fact. The ironies of history. But at any rate, so I'm not going to focus on Hunter Biden. And I'm actually not even going to address whether I think that will or won't do anything to President Biden or not. There are people who very badly want what's happening now to somehow or other affect him or his running for the presidency there. And I am just not going to get pulled into that web. And I'm also not going to talk about the children of the former president, the problematic children of the former president. We all are living in these times of these children of presidents. So what I want to do is go back in time and talk a little bit more broadly about how people have thought about presidential children over time, how different presidents have addressed the problem. John Adams is going to have a shining moment this morning. And it always gives me some pleasure to give John Adams a moment, because he never felt that he received enough of them when he was alive. So I sort of feel like 2 points for John Adams, and somewhere in wherever he is up there, this will make him happy, although that's not my purpose. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to children of presidents, it's not surprising, right? That they can be vulnerabilities or liabilities almost regardless of what they do. So even apart from whether we want to say they have committed a crime or they haven't committed a crime, the simple fact that they are there, right, that they exist and that they are doing things which in most families would be normal, and actually but their behavior in many families would be considered good behavior, but because they are children of a president in office, everything is a topic of public attention. There are implications to no matter what it is that they do or how the president responds to what they do. So there are layers upon layers upon layers of political meaning that get heaped onto the children of any president. Now, it's interesting that, first off, I guess I would say there's sort of a hands-off-ish idea, if not rule, regarding young children. And I say idea, if not rule, because it gets violated. But, you know, they're with Amy Carter, with Barron Trump, with the Obama children, even the Bush daughters, right? There was always some sense that particularly the younger ones, Amy Carter and Barron Trump and the Obama children, like you shouldn't go after young children in the name of politics, because if people are going after children of a president, that's what it's for, right? It's for partisan purpose, it's for politics. And sometimes that's followed, and sometimes that isn't. When it isn't, and when people, journalists or others, have seemingly gone after one of the younger kids, there's some shame potentially attached to that. So, you know, that's I don't want to call that a fact, a rule, something that people have to do, but at least that's some kind of minimal standard that we have a sense is proper. You don't attack kids, little kids. But beyond that, another component of presidential kids is a gender component. I'm going to come back to Sons and John Adams in a moment, but there is a gender component that's worth noting. And that is, again, over the long haul, daughters of presidents sometimes are particularly useful because, and this is particularly true back in time before women could have as explicit a political role. But when you had, you know, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, Alice, or other earlier daughters of presidents, it was explicitly because they weren't inherently able to engage in politics in the way that their brothers could, or that their father could, or any other male member of their family could. That could make them very handy because they could sort of be, I don't know, what do I want to call them? They could charm people and essentially serve in a political role by doing that, but it wouldn't seem political because, of course, they're women. So what they're doing isn't politics, they're just being women. So there's a gender component that in the past served some presidents well. Again, there's a lot of irony built into this topic today, explicitly because women were assumed to not be able to really engage in politics, which meant that when they were doing things for political purpose, it was more acceptable and seemingly, or at least you could mask it as being not political. And also children generally, but particularly daughters. Presidents, given that they've all been men, can make great use of the fact that they are just, you know, befuddled fathers trying to figure out their teenage daughters. And there's a whole persona there that a president can assume when it comes to a daughter, particularly a teenage daughter, being, you know, just an ordinary guy, just a dad, and I just can't figure out my daughter. And the, you know, most Americans who have a daughter would have some understanding of that and what that means. So it's a useful, I don't want to say PR, but it certainly is a useful persona, political persona. So there are ways in which children can serve their parent / president very well. Again, a gender component. So oddly enough, given that women did not have political power, they actually could have some political power. It's kind of a paradox. It's worth considering. But what I particularly thought of when I thought of this topic and what I wanted to address, and then I found a document this morning that I hadn't really been aware of before. I wanted to talk about John Adams and John Quincy Adams because that's the most obvious, I suppose you could say, example of a president and a son serving really prominent political roles as a diplomat overseas. And I'm going to come back to that momentarily. But that's, you know, if you're worried about the implications or the impact of kids on presidents, John Quincy Adams was public, front and center, given roles of great responsibility. And what's interesting is, even at the time, there was concern, although mostly on the part of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, because they're, you know, Massachusetts, thoughtful Massachusetts, descended from a, you know, the sort of Massachusetts Puritan past. I hope I'm doing the right thing. They agonized about what it meant that there was a son of a president serving in public office. I want to read you the document that I found because it actually, on the most basic level, it's just nice to see people worried about what it looks like to have a president worried about what it looks like to have a child being given some kind of public post and actually thinking this is probably not right, perhaps I should not do this. It's just having moral qualms. It's just always a nice thing to see. And there are people today who should have moral qualms who really don't have any at all. So this is a little dose of morality for your Friday morning. But in this case, interestingly, it's a letter from George Washington to John Adams, which I really just didn't know existed. And apparently, so John Adams was concerned, and let me back it up here a minute. So towards the end of Washington's presidency, Washington nominated John Quincy Adams to be minister to Portugal. And John Quincy Adams made all kinds of preparations to begin to go. But in the meantime, his father, John Adams, became president. And upon becoming president, decided John Quincy Adams would be a better service as minister to Prussia, not Portugal. And so switched his position. And he was clearly a little bit unsure about this. And he wrote to George Washington and asked him kind of what Washington thought about what he was doing and his son in public office, which all by itself, kind of every now and again, I just have a sort of, aw shucks, John Adams moment, because he's in a way very human, because he worries about things and he has a very obvious ego that gets wounded a lot. And he's more available on paper than some people are in this period. And I know I've said before, he has the most obvious sense of humor of any of the founding folk. But here he is sort of agonizing about what does it mean if his son is going to serve in this public position while he's president. So this is from February 20th, 1797. And it's what Washington writes to Adams. And apparently Adams had sent along a letter that John Quincy Adams had written about being sent to Prussia. And he was, again, worried about nepotism. He says in the letter, and this is what John Adams forwarded to Washington, John Quincy Adams says in the letter, the appointment to the mission of Portugal, which Washington did, was unknown to my father, unknown to John Adams. And he says, this is to his mother, I should say, my dear mother. I hope that you are aware that upon the contingency of my father being placed in the first magistracy, I shall never give him any trouble by solicitation for office of any kind, right? So John Quincy Adams writes to his mother and says, my father, he didn't know about the whole Portugal assignment, my diplomatic assignment, but now my father's president, and I don't want to have to be seen as taking a diplomatic position. And I hope I will never cause any trouble to my father when he's president with anything like this. And Adams wants George Washington's opinion and encloses this letter. And so these now are George Washington's words. Dear sir, I thank you for giving me the perusal of the enclosed, the John Quincy Adams letter. The sentiments do honor to the head and heart of the writer, and if my wishes would be of any avail, they should go to you in a strong hope that you will not withhold merited promotion from Mr. John Quincy Adams because he is your son. For without intending to compliment the father or the mother or to censure any others, I give it as my decided opinion that Mr. Adams is the most valuable public character we have abroad, and that there remains no doubt in my mind that he will prove himself to be the ablest of all our diplomatic corps. If he was now to be brought into that line or into any other public walk, I could not, upon the principle which has regulated my own conduct, disapprove of the caution which is hinted at in the letter, which is a very roundabout way of Washington saying, if you are putting him for the first time into public office, I wouldn't feel so peachy about it. And that's how I have tried to act as president. So Washington needed Hamilton as a person to do some of his writing for him, because Washington is not the best craftsman of sentence is. He's always very roundabout. But at any rate, he's saying, if you, John Adams, were just giving your son a position for the first time now, your caution would be good, and I would not feel good about what you were doing. But he has already entered. So I made him minister to Portugal. He's in public service. The public, more and more as he is known, are appreciating his talents and worth, and his country would sustain a loss if these were to be checked by over delicacy on your part. And here's the zippy closing. And I don't know if I've talked about this before, but when you read 18th century letters, like if you go to the Founders online database and look at letters and look at the closings, you know, I am, dear sir, your most humble and obedient is like yours truly or best wishes. But things that are variations on that and that seem emotional, and if they'd mention affection in the closing of a letter, that's like, ooh, that's someone making a strong statement. So here, George Washington signs this: with sincere esteem and affectionate regard, I am ever yours. Whoo, that's a George Washington sort of the kiss on the forehead, right? That's like, John, like I appreciate that you asked this. It's actually very sweet and moving that you have asked this. And you might have had reasons to, but I don't think you did. And I value this entire exchange. Really nice. Building on that, apparently, John Adams kept the letter aside, like didn't register it in with his public correspondence, and wrote on the bottom, excuse me, inscribed on the very bottom of the letter, my dearest friend, meaning Abigail, this is too precious a morsel to go out of your hands. Meaning, look at this letter that Washington just wrote about our son. Keep it and save it, because it's quite something. Which again, it's like a little human moment. But that's interesting, right? Because Adams is thinking about this, Washington is thinking about this, and as I've talked about before, on History Matters, in the 1790s, this is part of what makes this time period so interesting to me, is that things that in another period might not be a big deal are a hyper big deal in the 1790s, because the government is 6 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, and it's experimental, and it's a democratic republic in a world of monarchies, and there are any number of reasons why people believe, for good reason, that it might collapse. So they're always thinking, not everybody, but many are always thinking about the implications and the repercussions of what they're doing, and what's the possible bad that could come of this, and what might posterity think. There are any number of ways in which they have to triple think themselves all the time. And in a sense, this falls into that category, but that it falls into that category with this particular issue, when certainly, again, looking at monarchies and the idea that children of monarchs regularly in one way or another benefit from the fact that they're children of monarchs, this whole question that it's charged isn't surprising in the United States, that it's a big deal isn't surprising, but that it was a sincere concern does give you a sense of the responsibility that people, particularly presidents of this period and others, felt about doing the morally correct thing, even just in regard to their kids. One of the major, I mean, George Washington, it was not going to be questioned really that he was going to be the first president, but one of the major things that made people feel particularly safe with him as president was the simple fact that he didn't have any sons. And people talked about that, right? That particularly with him, because the thought was, well, he could be king in a second if he wanted to, king of America. He just has to dress a little differently, make a few demands, that the American public will go along with him in whatever he is. And so he could be a dangerous figure, despite the fact that, you know, commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and presiding over the Constitutional Convention and all of these other things that obviously make him the no question choice for the first president. But despite all that, who knows what could happen? He might want to be a king-like figure, unlikely, but still, or he might just become one based on how people treat him. For that reason, the fact that he had no sons was seen as, to use an 18th century word, providential, right? It was providential that he has no sons, so he cannot be a king. This is good. We will be safe in entrusting him with power on that level, at least, because the way the rest of the world works, sons benefit from fathers with power. Sons get power. So the larger story here, or I suppose the thing to think about here, is on the one hand, it is very true that I'm moving my page here because I always get what you say in chat appears on the bottom of the screen, and I have to try really hard not to look at it because then I want to get moved into the chat, into the conversation. So I'm holding back. But my larger point here is that on the one hand, children are always liabilities and vulnerabilities, and sometimes that has to do with what the children do, and sometimes that has to do with what one's political opponents want. And children can be a liability, a vulnerability in that way too. The simple fact that they exist, and that they can become targets, and people for partisan reasons can hone in on a child and use that child as a way to, they hope, get to a president. So what we're seeing now with Hunter Biden, and have been seeing for a long time, because Hunter Biden is like the eternal target from some on the right. Clearly, he is the eternal hope from some on the right, is that they'll be able to find a way with him to get at Biden. And there was even a statement this last week that I highlighted, I think on Twitter. At this point, I highlighted on one of 5,000 social media platforms, that I think was the head of the Republican National Committee, who said, now it's time to go after Biden. And so let's go, which is really not how you use impeachment or how you attack children of presidents. Like, let's go get him, folks, is not. Let me put it this way: you want to talk about weaponized government? Let's use government to get him is weaponized government. So that came by today, blatant sort of statement of what we really shouldn't be doing. But Hunter Biden, for partisan reasons, now falls into that category too. So I suppose I would say, as what happens, I do always like to close my comments with some advice about how the past can help us think about the present. In the case of Hunter Biden, be aware of the fact that some of what you're seeing is going to be really obvious, but it's going to be really easy to forget, is way more about partisans clawing at something to try and get to the father than it might be about what Hunter Biden did. That Hunter Biden, could have done things that are ethically or legally problematic, and that's totally possible, and that's worth noting. But it's also worth remembering that some of the things that he did may not be as big a problem as they will be made to be now, given our partisan climate, and that that people have been trying for many moons to find a way to grab at him. So be aware, on the one hand, of the liability factor of particularly now sons and fathers, and then also just be aware of the fact that you need to view whatever's happening now through a partisan lens in addition to a legal lens. So I'm not saying dismiss whatever happens. Legality matters, actions matter, but so do the partisan reasons for pushing something. So be aware of both of those things. Look through two lenses at the same time, or one and then the other. Don't forget to consider what's happening now as a product of very specifically the moment that we're in, and to step back a little bit and before drawing conclusions, asking questions, evaluating what actually happened. I would say the same is true if we were talking about former President Trump's children. One would need to look and see what they actually did before drawing conclusions. We have a pretty good sense of what they actually did, as a matter of fact, so one can draw conclusions. But I'm not gonna, I swore at the beginning I was not gonna go there, and I'm not gonna go there now. I'm just going to conclude by saying, oops, I almost forgot the mug. I'm just going to conclude by saying it's a longstanding problem for good reason. And we should be aware of that as we evaluate what's happening now. And for that reason, we should also always be aware of both the legal and the partisan implications of what we're seeing, and that they may be in agreement and that they may not be. So in a sense, put your historian hat on as we're watching things unfold, because this is going to be, whatever happens, is going to be something that has implications and repercussions of many, many kinds. Okay, I was hiding, there we go. I was hiding the chat here. So normally I see mug. And I didn't see mug. Okay, now I see. Thank you, Carolee. So my green juice mug. I really was searching today to find a mug that had something to do with children or presidents or something. And I think you will follow me in my logic here. This is a Carolee mug. And it is my feathered child. It's a day of newbie mugs. That's the newbie news, right? So that was all I could think of, was this is my feathered child newbie. This is from Carolee. It says history matters and so does newbie, and then it says underneath that, oodling for democracy every Friday morning. So this to me seemed highly appropriate. Yep. And then on the back it says B to B to B, and that's the newbie news. Oodly oo peep peep peep, but that's the newbie news. So he's reporting very important newbie news. But anyway, that thank you. I see little hearts coming up. That was all I could get for kids was, and I don't normally call myself mom in relation to newbie, but he is my feathered child. So there you go.
Yep.
Okay.
And people love him.
Pardon?
I said, and people love him. He has a lot of followers.
He has a fan base, and he does, and a lot of, so we could talk about this in the after party, but what surprised me in preparing for the last episode of my podcast was the number of people who talked about that they're going to miss newbie.
He's not going anywhere. His account's still active.
Oh yeah, no, he's not going anywhere for sure.
Yeah, I haven't heard him this morning though. He's been pretty quiet.
He's very quiet. He is indeed very quiet. He's having a quiet morning.
Oh. Well, we have questions. Let's get a sip of that green juice. You'll need your energy. And people were going a lot in the chat. I know that you turn it off when you're talking, but a lot about the primogenitor. So I don't know if you want to address it all, the boys inheriting versus the girls, and what did presidents do versus everybody else. That's been a big, heavy chat theme this morning. Okay. We have a couple of questions from our friend Miranda. Here's the first one. She said, since this was before my time, can you explain why people were so scandalized when JFK Jr. saluted his father's casket as it passed by him at the funeral? It's become an iconic moment now.
Well, I don't know if that was scandalized. Actually, others could tell me. I don't know if that was a scandalizing moment. My impression of it is just that was a touching moment, right? Yeah. The little boy sort of saluting his father's casket that way. But others, now I closed chat. Now I need to open chat so I can see people. Okay.
It's before my time too, but
was it? Was there a scandal?
Yeah, I always thought it was just sad.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think it was a touching. It's a good question because by today's standards, it probably would have been, people would have found a way to make it a scandal. Oh, he's taught his son military. I don't know what they would come up with. But at the time, I don't think there was, sadly, I don't think there was a scandal. Nowadays, people would have found a way to make it one. And then we'd be scandalized by the people making the scandal. And that is where we are right now.
Right. Okay. Our good friend Dale asked, was there a national period of grief when Lincoln lost 2 of his 3 sons, sort of the opposite of a presidential parent trap, or was that just a Lincoln family matter?
Well, generally speaking, the nation mourns with a president when a president loses a child in one way or another. A dramatic example of that is Franklin Pierce, who doesn't have a lot of dramatic moments, but he lost his son just before he got to the White House and became president. There was a train accident. His son, Benjamin, I believe was his name, is killed in a dramatic, gory way in this train accident. And so he comes into office with this hanging over him, and there, he and his wife are in mourning, and that shaped, well, on the one hand, it shaped the early part of his presidency. It also made Americans really hold back because he was a grieving father. So, what's funny is in some way, what we're talking about here is families, right? Like anyone that has the tragedy of losing a child, you feel a certain thing for that person. It's the complications of power in families that is what we're fundamentally talking about here. So in some ways, like the saluting his father's casket, or the nation being saddened at the loss of Benjamin Pierce, on one level, it's like, well, yeah, those are things that happen in families, right? I read this morning when I was researching, I didn't go back to find it, but I guess former President Obama was on some evening talk show talking about trying to figure out his daughter's social media use or something like that, and he was like befuddled dad. He was, which is why I mentioned that sort of persona, adopting that persona, that's an example. Obama was doing that very thing, not the only person, but that was a great example of it. Some things are just family things, but if you can capitalize on them in some way as a president, they can be very powerful because they humanize you in a way that can be prickly, should be, people should be, at least have some qualms about attacking a kid or attacking someone as a father or as a mother. So that can be, that persona, that stance can be very useful if you use it the right way. It also, as I suggested in what I just said, can be really problematic if you don't use it in a strategic way.
I think when the Obama's grandmother moved in with them to kind of keep an eye on the girls when they had to travel a lot, I never heard anybody say anything about grandma. Like, she was untouchable.
That's, I did not remember that. And that's absolutely true. And that was, well, again, we live in different times now, in which, if that were happening now, people would find some way to attack Michelle Obama. Who the heck knows what they would have been doing. But at the time, the idea that, grandma's coming in to sort of help out was a family thing. It was like, okay, let's, like, any of us could easily do the same thing. Like, there's a lot going on here. Mom,
we need you.
Please come help.
Yeah. Okay, Dale has a question. He says, I'm sorry, not Dale. This one's another one from Miranda. She said, did Robert Todd Lincoln ever get shunned by DC politics after being president at 3 different presidential assassinations, counting his own father, or is it just one of the great coincidences of history? I didn't realize that.
I didn't either. And I don't know the answer to that because I didn't realize that. Yeah, it is horrible. I know that I'm not going to get it wrong. Benjamin Brown French, who's my book is like, I'm not quite sitting in the right place, built the little table that Washington used to have the Bible on to take the oath of office. And I'm not going to get the details right. It was used more than once. And in almost every case when it was used, something horrible happened to the person who was using it. Right. So I know that, like, that was put aside. It was like, but I don't know about the son being shunned. It's a good question, but I also didn't know that.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Kara Lee has a question. She said, do you think attacks on presidential children will happen in the same way when I like that she didn't say if, thank you, Kara Lee, when we have a female president? Will it be worse? What would happen if I'm not going to read that part. That's what would happen with Bruce Springsteen was president. I'll tell you what, he gets stuff done. She's just doing that to get her question read.
Yes,
but I will say, I don't know, Joanne, if you ever listened to the Obama Springsteen podcast, but they talked a lot about raising their children on that podcast.
No, I did not.
I think it was called Renegades. It was really good. It was a short, like maybe 10 episodes, but it was good. So yeah, other women in other countries have children, and I don't think we hear other people around the world dissing presidential moms. So what do you think about that?
That's interesting. Now, I don't know about that, although I can't say that it'd be a really interesting question. Actually, it would be a good research paper question as to how children of rulers around the world get treated or not treated, or paid attention to or not paid attention to. And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know how women, leaders who are women in other countries who have children, how that's unfolded. I think that in the United States, that would be harder. That would be more problematic, because it would be, we're so unenlightened as to not have had a woman be president yet, that when that happens, this will be like another way to attack a woman. And there are all kinds of new added bonus ways in which someone can just, well, you're a mother, you should know X, or you should have done Y, or what does it say about you being a leader if you couldn't even do X for your children, which that kind of logic won't work on a father in the same way. Wasn't it Hillary Clinton was attacked for like not baking cookies? What was that about? Right, that she was
stand by your man. Yeah,
right that you need to. I've been spending a lot of time watching The Midwife's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale. Yeah. Midwife's Tale I did read, but that was in college. The Handmaid's Tale. So I keep thinking about that. I keep coming back to that when I'm talking about women leaders. But now I'm going to think of The Midwife's Tale for a very long time. At any rate, but it will be a vulnerability, and it will be one that's particularly repulsive, because it will be grounded on every stereotypical assumption about what women can and can't do, and what women should or shouldn't do. So yeah, sadly, you can almost predict that. You can almost expect that. So that in that case, what will be interesting will be, what do we do in response to that? How do people address that? How does the woman who is the president address that? How does that act out in the discourse? And I don't know the answer to that, but if you are the first woman president, man, you better think about all kinds of stuff like that in advance, because it's people are going to feel that it's like a grenade they can grab onto and throw in your general direction, that somehow it has something fundamentally to do with your character, what kind of mother you are, as opposed to what kind of father you are, which, do people talk about that very much? What kind of a father is, maybe now and again, but the mother issue is going to have a whole different intensity to it.
Yeah. Linda asks if there were other children of presidents in the past who were charged with crimes, or is this a new phenomenon? A new low?
Well, yeah, there are certainly past sons and sons-in-law who were problematic characters. Actually, William Stephen Smith, John Adams' son-in-law, was a slightly problematic character who he was trying to find some way or another to help, and he didn't feel good about it, and others didn't feel good about William Stephen Smith. As far as a crime, I don't know. I mean, you could say, I can't remember whose son it is who drove a car right up to the White House. I mean, that's a crime, but it's not like lying about drug abuse or getting money for random unknown purposes from a foreign power, or whatever the other things are that children do. What I do know is that yesterday I was seeing, coverage of this, along the lines of, this has never happened before, it's unprecedented that a president's son is being charged with a crime. And my emotional response to that, and I'm announcing that this is not my intellectual but emotional response, was that of all of the things happening around us that are unprecedented and that have been unprecedented, it feels like people really, really, some people really want this thing to have the same gravitas as some of the other ones. And I'm not saying to dismiss it. And if Hunter Biden did something wrong, then he's responsible for having done the wrong thing. Fine. But unfortunately, this will not be that clear cut. It already isn't. So imagine if it were that clear cut. Did he commit a crime? Oh yeah, he did. Okay, let's take care of it. Okay. But no, we're looking at presidential politics and electoral politics now when it comes to Hunter Biden.
Yeah. When you were talking earlier about Chelsea, they were talking in the chat about Chelsea Clinton and others, saying to leave Barron alone. I know the Obama girls and the Bush girls stuck up for him as well. I do remember, I think it was Jenna Bush when she was in college. They said the Secret Service had to extract her from a frat party because she was underage. And someone took a picture of her drinking. And I was like, okay, well, all of you who want to like throw her to the wolves, if there are pictures of you in college when you were underage, like let's put those out there too. And they were saying she didn't get, charged with drinking because she was the Bush daughter. I'm like, no, because she's a college kid, leave her alone. That's the only one I remember more recent history.
Yeah,
sort of a crime, but
sort of a crime has a lot of play here. I'm following
Ellen. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Francesca, talking about the crime that this is, what kind of crime this is, and she says lots of attorneys that she follows on Twitter said they've never heard of anyone being charged with Hunter's crime. So, he lied about his drug use when buying a gun. I'm not going to even go there, but that's at the moment what he's being charged with.
Yeah. All right, Ellen asks, when did we go towards this idea of kids of presidents are off limits? She was wondering if Amy Carter was the beginning of that, or why she was treated so badly.
That's a good question. I mean, I remember how badly she was treated. And can you imagine? I mean, all of us thinking back to being like that teenage moment when everything doesn't look right. Like there's nothing about you that looks normal. Like your hair is weird and your growth is weird and everything is weird. That sort of awkward teenage moment that we all have, and being in that moment, in the middle of that moment, when your father becomes president, right? That's just hard. So I remember the treatment, and I remember people being sort of like, shame on you, for that kind of treatment. I don't remember the ultimate impact, though. I don't remember if people stopped, if people felt shamed. I'm now trying to read the comments here. No, the Obama girls were not spared, although, again, it's prickly, is this the word I used in my comments? It's a little prickly because people kind of know if they're going after the kids, something about it's not right. And so everyone assumes something about it's not right. The question is, what does that mean? What do you do? And that's a totally different question when partisan politics gets involved. Here we go. People are saying, oh, they're all, boy, the chat today is all over the place.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the chat. All right, George, who's put a lot in the chat today. George wondered about the children of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Was their relationship in the papers, the fact that they had children, was that covered up, or was it common knowledge that those were his children, even though he wasn't officially acknowledging them?
Well, that's an interesting question. So some historians have suggested that because it actually was not uncommon, and in fact was relatively common in the plantation South for plantation owners to have sex with the enslaved people who they enslaved and have children by them, that and I can't remember now, there's even a book, oh, it's going to kill me because it's from someone I know. At any rate, there's a book that talks about, in the neighborhood, like what would people have thought in the neighborhood, like in Charlottesville, and what would they have assumed, with the idea being, well, the idea that this may have happened would not have shocked people in the neighborhood. It was a thing that happened in Southern plantations. As far as Sally Hemings goes, that was a newspaper editor, James Callender, who felt slighted by Jefferson when Jefferson became president. He's the one who came forward and brought that charge out, made that charge public. And Jefferson, so there were two things that were made public about Jefferson not long after he becomes president. And one of them is that he had an affair, or tried to have an affair, with the wife of a friend of his, and one was Sally Hemings. And he didn't respond to the Sally Hemings charge at all. He said something that, I once made the mistake of trying to make love to another man's wife or something. There's some statement about he admits that like he was like a young man and he whatever, it was not a good thing to have done, but that's all he admits to. There were cartoons, political cartoons at the time, sort of poking at Jefferson for supposedly sleeping with one of his enslaved people and what that meant. But again, here you have something that not only could be useful in a partisan way, but that has the whole question of sectionalism and race and slavery heaped on top of the partisan issue. So it was something that people could talk about and did talk about. Actually, I should mention this because it's fascinating and it covers some of this in the book. And I happen to have just taught it this last week. There's a book an early book by Annette Gordon Reed. I always get the order wrong. It's either Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings or Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. An American Controversy is the subtitle. And I assigned that book because she approaches the whole question as a lawyer. And she says, okay, I'm a lawyer and I'm being presented with evidence from various sources about what happened here. I have oral histories of what happened. I have sons and daughters talking about what happened. I have whatever. She pulls all of the evidence and then says, I'm going to evaluate the evidence as evidence and see what we can trust and see what we can't trust. And within that context, there's all kinds of interesting information about what people at the time said and thought. Often people at the time on Monticello, at Monticello on the plantation. I recommend that book. It's more about how people thought about what went on than it is about the actual relationship between Hemings and Jefferson. So oddly enough, I just taught it on Wednesday, and it touches on a lot of this. So it might be of interest to folks. Oh, there we go. Gloria mentions. Yeah, she using it for the same reason. It's really, she makes really valid points that almost shouldn't have to be said, but that you don't think about, like, why, right, there's a different book called Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, which is different from Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. She makes the point that, why are we more likely to believe oral history from white people than oral history from Black people? Right. Which we are, right? And if you think about the fact that people do tend to make that assumption, there's no reason. If you're going to, consistency is a lot of what she talks about in that book. You need to be consistent in the way that you're thinking about evidence, and the color of the person that the evidence comes from should not be an issue. And yet one of the things she reveals over and over and over again is obviously in so many other aspects of American politics and culture, it is.
Yeah. People are putting book links in there. I added one. I don't know if you've read Jocelyn Johnson. She's an author from here in Charlottesville, a member of the descendant community, about the same topic.
I want to say that there's some book about a member, something in the neighborhood about the question of Charlottesville, but I always tell people I'm a historian because I'm not good at names and titles and dates. I'm not. I'm excellent at primary sources though.
Yes. The other one I was thinking of, whenever I go to Montpelier, they always talk about his stepson's gambling debts and that he was supposed to have freed his slaves. In his will, he had said that when he was gone, that they should be let go and given their freedom. And then Dolly kind of took a backseat on that because she had to pay off all these debts and she kept selling them off. Is that something you're familiar with? They talk about that a lot at Montpelier. Tad, I think his name was, or he had
there was
bad
highly problematic son who did all kinds of highly problematic things, gambling debt. I think that's the son too who cut signatures off letters to sell them. Like, here, have a Madison signature, right? Right. So that, and I don't know if there was a fuss made at the time about that. I mean, that's something I know about only because as a person reading letters, anybody who does anything to a letter, it's like, no, how dare you?
Gluing them to documents, like to make it look like he signed it, or just selling them like autographs?
No, selling them like autographs.
That's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you have no morals and you're looking to make money and you have gambling debts, like, hey, look at this. Not a lot of people have access to this.
Kind of like Fergie, was that her name? The ex-daughter-in-law of the Queen was selling off things, they said, like access and the royal family.
Oh, no, I don't remember that.
All right,
There you
Miranda
go.
asked,
Someone just sent a link. You guys are like, bam, bam, a link to Founders Online, James Madison and his stepson, John Payne Todd, the problematic stepson. Yeah.
that just sounds like a good movie script, The Problematic Stepson.
It does. It does. Although there would be a limited audience for a problematic 18th century stepson, I suspect. I'd be there. I'd be watching.
Okay, we have a Garfield question, not the cat, the president. Miranda asks, she says, he was Garfield's Secretary of War and present for his assassination at the Pan American Exposition outside the door when McKinley was shot. Oh, I think that's not a question, Miranda. This is the question box. I misread that. Okay, I think she was talking about the assassinations that Lincoln's son.
Okay, got it.
That makes more sense. All right. Oh, here's a good compare and contrast. Dave asked if you could compare and contrast father-son presidencies between the Adamses and the Bushes.
Okay, so when it first became clear that there was going to be a Bush father-son presidential moment, trying to decide how far to go with this. I was called by a press outlet to comment on it. And they were like, so could you compare and contrast the Adams father and son team and the Bush father and son team? And let's just say I erupted in a way that I should not have done at the idea of comparing the Bushes and the Adamses. And John Quincy Adams as someone who was hyper qualified for his job, and just practical, like how many languages did he know and how long had he been in public service, and how, there's, stepping back from that, father-son presidential teams and families, Bush family, Kennedy family, families that end up having kind of a dynastic hold on American politics. That's very old world, and that's very problematic. And again, in an American context, I think actually I'm not going to have the quote in my head, but John Adams talks about that, but at various points, the hold that these kinds of names and family histories have on people, that they're kind of a gloss or a magic that people grab onto, family names, and we see that even in American politics. We have sort of there's sort of an American knee-jerk admiration for some things that are exceedingly old world-ish. And the idea of like the Kennedys, the Kennedy family, something about that is not necessarily just New Worldish, but really has an much older tradition, and Americans kind of buy into that because there's a security in that, and also a kind of, many have already talked about the Kennedys as kind of the equivalent of American royalty because they're a family that people treat that way. And you can see just, again, with the Kennedy family and all of the various Kennedys in various places and the quagmires that they produce, right? That's a different problem, not one that we're talking about today, but that's presents its own complications, and is another thing that Americans on the one hand are fascinated by and then feel a little bit funny about, right? Like there's one way in which Americans, whether they're consciously thinking about it or not, they have some kind of a sense of like, we do things kind of differently here, and we're doing this thing. Does that fit with how we're kind of doing things differently here? And what does that mean? There's the emotional pull of some kinds of politics, and then there's the intellectual realization of what we're supposed to be doing politically, and they don't necessarily line up. Up with the conversation.
Bailey, we haven't heard from Bailey in a while. Hi, Bailey. Bailey asked if you could speak to children that were specifically hidden. We've already mentioned Sally Hemings. Were there other hidden children?
Well, so the short answer to that would be yes, right? So there are, and not necessarily hidden can mean a lot of things. Hidden can mean not really brought out into the public light. Hidden can mean not acknowledged. For one reason or another. And yes, we can, even in the recent past, there are kids who sort of fall into that category. It's for a president, you're sort of navigating the family that you have around you or that you don't have around you children, relatives, you're navigating around your family as president. You're trying in one way or another to take an office that does not comfortably fit with an average family in any sense of the word. And so, that's going to be by necessity kind of a tap dance for any president. Again, another research paper one could do would be to just look at presidents and see how they, particularly at the beginning of presidencies, are trying to navigate how to sort of push a family into this elevated spot in which they live in the national house, right? They live in the White House with the family, and they are the first family, and all of the implications of that. It is, I don't know. I mean, there are many people, I think, who would love to be president. I am not one of those people, because being, for 1,000 reasons, one of them being that being in the public in that way, so that every single thing that you do or say to anyone in your family and otherwise is going to be political fodder. I can't even imagine how exhausting that would be. And children, as I said at the outset, are kind of an ultimate vulnerability that way, because they're going to do all kinds of goofy things. They're children, and then they're going to leave all kinds of openings for enemies.
Yeah. Here's a question from another person that I'm not familiar. So Craig, if this is your first time with us, please let us know in the chat. Craig asked about, what about the daughters who served as first ladies? How were they treated?
Well, so like Jefferson's daughter acted as a kind of first lady. And in that case, I don't think that they were attacked. They were sort of stepping up. And again, this has to do with gender norms and daughters versus sons. So a lot of sons end up being hired as like secretaries to their father, and some daughters end up acting as first ladies. I think the sons acting as secretaries take more flack than the daughters stepping in as first ladies. But I mean, it's a huge question, a huge problem if a president gives a formal political position to a kid for reasons obviously of nepotism, but also just for reasons of openings for corruption, or even on a more simple level, the simple fact that the person who they're giving an office to might not be qualified for it. And the rumor would be that this person was just given an office because they're related to the president, which is kind of what the John Adams, George Washington correspondence was about, is that Washington was like, yeah, I know this is a sensitive issue, but it's not as though John Quincy Adams is not the most qualified person for what he's doing. If he weren't, then you would be very much open to charges of nepotism and favoritism and all kinds of things that are seemingly very apparent. And then the question becomes, what do presidents do about it, or what do they have to do about it? And what does that mean about the presidency? That's a different issue, but a really interesting one. What are these issues that we're talking about here? How do they shape our sense of the office of the presidency, which they do? I'm trying to keep up here.
Have time for one more?
Sure, let's do one more.
Well, Gloria was asking you to clarify, should the adult children of presidents be held accountable, or should they be off limits?
Well, I mean, the adult children of presidents, if they do things wrong, they're adults, and they should be held accountable for doing things wrong. Adults, but we were mostly talking about children today, so that's what I was focused on, was children. But no, I mean, any adult, even a president who seemingly commits a crime should be held accountable for allegedly committing the crime, and we have a legal system that helps take care of that. So yeah, I don't think if you're happen to be the son of or daughter of a president as an adult and you do something wrong, that you should be, get off scot-free. I don't believe that, regardless of your party, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, somebody noted in the chat earlier that Amy Carter was arrested several times at environmental protests and protesting.
Oh, that's right.
And yeah,
so I forgot about that.
And I think didn't Reagan's daughter get arrested for something similar? I think a protest of some sort. Yeah,
I do not remember.
They're not perfect, the adult children.
And I see that Craig has been lurking in a good way.
Oh, that's great, Craig. We're glad you came out with the question.
Well, yeah, so now you get a welcome just for like piping up.
Well,
and
everything else is more an after party question. So I'm going to save one in particular for the after party.
Okay, we got Joseph though. First time viewer. Oh, and Joseph is here. Okay, enjoyed now and then. And okay, look at this.
Gravitate
Joseph,
over.
I want to sort of get out there and say to folks who are going to miss now and then, we got some more quality history conversation going on here. So Joseph, thank you very much for making the switch, the trek. I missed now and then already, and it's only been a week, but
yep. So okay, he just outed himself. Matt is here, and that was the one I was saving for the after party.
Oh,
but I feel like Matt needs to ask his question in person. John, is there any way we can turn Matt's camera on? Is that okay, Matt? Because this is a question that I don't feel qualified to ask. Only Matt can ask the question. Matt, are you okay if we turn your camera on? I feel like John has to have your permission.
And I don't know if
Matt says yes. John, can we turn Matt's camera on? Matt's here, and his question is a Matt question.
And Sydney's question, while we're figuring with the camera, I do want to say, Sydney says, why do people get arrested for protesting, even just a peaceful protest? Protest, we have a right to protest. We don't have a right to violently protest. Oh, I see Matt, the photo, but okay, I'm going to come back to you, Sydney. Matt.
Okay, Matt has a question.
You lurker.
I am. I actually had 20 minutes between meetings, so I listened to the questions. I didn't get a chance to hear the first part. I don't know.
For those who don't know, Matt was my original partner in crime.
Yes.
So we're
nearly as talented as Annie. My question was very simple. I just wanted to know, were there any presidents in the past that maybe used jazz hands as a mechanism for defending their children? Was it effective at all? And
I don't think, I will explain this to people who are not aware of this. Matt's effective use of jazz hands, whenever I be verklempt in any way, like I would get caught up in something or I get upset, and Matt would be like, jazz hands, jazz hands. Oh, Matt, that you just made my day.
My jazz hands. Somebody see him. There's it. There you go.
That's what we wanted, Matt. That's what we missed.
Oh, I miss you guys. I had, like I said, I had a couple of minutes and I had to say hi. And hi, John. I miss you. Miss everybody at NCHE. Hope everyone's doing well.
I miss you. But I'll know that sometimes you're lurking. That actually is good to know. That's
every
right.
Once in a while.
Yes, but thank you for appearing and for offering jazz hands. That you made it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go, but so good to see you guys and enjoy.
Good to see you, Matt. Thank you for coming in. Okay, now we have to go to the after party. Okay, so we are now shifting a minute or two late to the after party. So let me explain what that means. We will now stop recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation. If you have beamed in through the NCHE new spiffy website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be jazz hands. Poof, you will be in, I know, in the after party. Normally, I would say if you're on Facebook, you have to leave Facebook, but I gather we had a problem with Facebook today. And so I'm going to say this here in case Facebook people come and find this episode later, that we apologize. We did not mean to leave out Facebook, but there was some kind of technical difficulty among the many happening today. So please, Facebook people, know that we love you if you come back and watch this. And actually, we'll have to find a way to say to Facebook people that there was a technical difficulty, but that they can catch up on it. Man, bingo, poof, triple bingo. You guys are, it's like
we haven't had jazz hands in a while, so it was nice to bring that one.
Okay, so we're going to switch to the after party. I do want to thank you as ever for beaming in here for the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. These conversations matter, even on the most basic level of keeping us together and alert to what's going on around us, and to encourage us all to think carefully before responding, particularly emotionally, to things. So on that level, I appreciate that you're here because it matters politically, among other things. Personally, I'm eternally grateful that you come here because this is a very special group, a very special platform. And we will be continuing on forging ahead in the future here, addressing so many things. And particularly as politics begins to heat up with a looming, I can't quite believe I'm going to say, presidential election. We're going to have a lot to talk about. So at any rate, thank you guys all for coming. Have a really good week. Annie and John and Matt, wherever you are. Thank you for coming. Now there's like some, okay, we're going to go to the after party and then I have to answer.
Sydney's question. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to come right back, right? Okay.
Okay. So I feel like this is a commercial interruption. Brought to you by Fresca and Jazz Hands. John, this would be a good time for you to pitch the conference while Joanne's running to grab something. Do you want to tell us the dates of the conference, how they register?
Sure. So we'll be in Cleveland, Ohio on March 7th through 9th. You can register on the website. Just go to the new website and click conference, and there's a drop-down box with all kinds of information there. And then we also have our Equity Summit coming up on October 7th. And you can find more information about that on the conversations page. There you go. Should I stop recording or are we still going?
Oh, no, it's still recording.
Okay.
So
Do you
my
wanna say-
wonderful departure. So the people downstairs in the building, someone wants to come up and look around at something in my apartment. And I'm like, I'm live. And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm on my webcast being beamed around the world. Like, what? It's like,
Wanna be
not
on camera?
now.
All right, should John turn the recording off?
Nope, it's still on.
Okay, should we wait for him to turn it off? I'm asking.
Oh,
Like, do you-
we can, gosh, I guess we can sort of begin the after party and just be aware of the fact that,
Okay. You want to get Sydney's question in and then have him turn it off?
yes, and then we can, okay. So Sydney's question is, why do people get arrested for peacefully protesting? In some cases, they shouldn't, right? I mean, so, and that's a big question. If you're peacefully protesting, we have a right to engage in peaceful protest. And sometimes it's a overeager person in charge who does not like the fact that a protest is happening. And that's, if you're talking about a list of things to be aware of and thoughtful of and wary of and worried about, people who are just peacefully protesting being arrested is one of them. Doesn't mean that there's never a reason, but it does mean that that should not be a hasty, easy thing to do. Wow, we're still recording. That it should not be a hasty thing that people do. And when you look at, sometimes we see this site coming from overseas, that you'll see people, standing with signs and being sort of violently corralled and arrested. That's not a good sign. That, we have a right, we have the right of petition, we have the right to protest, we have a right, the government rests on us. And that should be, if you're going to violate that in some way, there should be a really good reason, and it should be done very cautiously with a lot of forethought. It's not something that should be just taken for granted. So it's a good question, Sydney, because it shouldn't happen easily. It's not, you shouldn't assume that if you go somewhere and hold up a sign, you're going to automatically get arrested. Now, that said, I've taken part in protests in the past, and there was a point at which we were told they're starting to arrest people now because this has gotten so big, it's disruptive. And if you don't want to get arrested and we cannot get you out, if you are arrested, make a choice, right? So sometimes there are so many people, or something is so disruptive that pushes things into another category. So it's not an easy question, but it's a really important one that you asked, Sydney. And now I'm trying to catch up here.